Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror in detail. Today we are going to share werewolf horror stories. First story. We call him Wolf. He's the cutest little white Shih Tzu you'll ever see. The little Ewok face is undeniably adorable, and he gets zoom eyes like no other. He was the run of the litter when we bought him, about half the size of his brothers and sisters. The 12 pounds of fury didn't care though, as small dog syndrome, I like to call it, made him want to tango with anything else that moved and was bigger than him. Sandra named him Keith. I named him Shithead, as lovingly as possible, and Marcus named him Wolf. Our names were interchangeable though. The smart boy responded to all three. The three of us had been housemates for a few years and figured we were all okay with having a fourth, huggable member. He beat all of our responsibilities. Luckily enough, our jobs lined up well enough so that he was never alone. Sandra and I would take care of him during the evenings when we got home, and Marcus be home and awake overnight for his remote software job. Needless to say, he was spoiled with attention and care. It almost got to the point where he would stop eating his dog food. Since we just feed him ourselves, everything's safe for dogs, of course. He was our little, living stuffed animal that helped us through our days. The little guy really didn't like our neighbor, and to be honest, neither of us three did either. We shared a house with him. It was just split down the middle to save space and maximize tenants. He didn't have any housemates on his half, so he must have decided that living as disgusting and loud as possible was an okay thing to do. I can't imagine that he took his garbage out regularly, and I believed he didn't actually have functioning eardrums. The heavy, bassy music would be timed almost perfectly to Sandra and I coming home, sometimes waking Marcus up early. It was enough to rumble our meager coffee table, making eating sometimes a pain in the ass. Shithead would always bark at it for a bit before hiding his ears in a nearby pillow. It usually took one, even two, of us to go and ask through the door to quiet him down. He must have thought that, suddenly, we would forget or get used to it, because the next day it would just start again, and we couldn't do much more about it. The landlord refused to kick him out. Apparently he paid well, and he legally hadn't done anything wrong. I was taking our cutie out to our small, fenced backyard so he could do his business and run around when I heard him start to growl. I turned to where his attention was focused and heard the screen door squeal open over the fence. Out stepped our neighbor. Probably the first time I've physically seen him in months. A stench wafted from the door as he took out a cigarette and sat down on a cheap plastic chair on his back porch. I didn't want to stick around, so I called in Wolf and tried not to look in his direction as I closed the door and got ready for bed. I awoke to the sudden sound of crashing, wood breaking and splintering and furniture being tossed. I heard metal squeal and be torn, and a high-pitched scream, immediately drowned out by a deep bark. Through the walls I heard things thrown and more screaming, before it was cut out by a gurgling noise and crunching. I barged into Marcus's room. He had security cameras in the front and back, but he wasn't there. I panicked my way out and fumbled for something to use as a weapon as Sandra came out, hair messy and near panicked as I. She called the police, and thankfully they came quickly. A cruiser pulled in, with one of the police coming to talk to us, and the other to investigate the noise. After a few questions, the second came in, pale in the face. He had already called for backup, and he described the scene as such. Doors were torn in and broken apart, including the metal and reinforced door that had been personally placed. Some walls were caved in from a heavy impact, and multiple bags of trash were torn open and spilling everywhere. Our neighbor was found in his room, behind the metal door. His abdomen and throat had been torn to shreds, innards spilling everywhere. Massive red and brown paw prints were found stuck to the already dirty carpet. Neither of us got any sleep that night. There was too much commotion when the reinforcements arrived, but they couldn't find anything and called it a bust for the night, deciding that it was some freak bear attack. Sandra and I were given the choice to either stay in our home or spend a while in a hotel. We decided to pack up. Marcus hadn't come back by then, but we both figured he would be okay if we all found a new place to live. It wasn't until mid-afternoon that Marcus came back. His eyes were baggy and he was well bundled up. In his arms, sitting triumphantly, was our little boy, awake and full of energy as ever. His paws were dirty and he seemed to be a little cold, but he had his tongue out in that smiley sort of way that dogs do when they pant. He yipped when he saw us, almost falling out of Marcus's arms to greet us. He was put down onto the ground and ran up to us. I noticed it more when he came to greet us with licks. His mouth was spattered red. Second story. My sister went missing in a small lakeside town. I shouldn't have gone to look for her. The last time anyone saw my sister was nearly a month ago. This is completely out of character for her because out of the two of us, I am the fuck up and she is the responsible one. However, one day her idiot friends decided to drag her along to go camping on the other side of the state. Why they chose to go there as their destination, I haven't a clue. While the town offered an escape from the world, it didn't have much else going for it. If you want to know what the town was like, the first thing I saw when I arrived was a child dragging a tin can with a leash as if it were a dog. The rest of the town was very much the same, somewhere in the void between weird, surreal, and worrying. When my sister didn't call after a few days, everyone grew worried and did all we could think of to find her. We drove all the way over there to hang up flyers and knock on doors, but no one had seen her or her friends. The police were no help. Every time they saw my car, they would pull me over to tell me that there was no reason for me to worry, or that she was most likely on a romantic getaway with her boyfriend and that I should just return home. It took all the patience I had to play nice when they said this. If they knew her, they would know that disappearing like that was impossible. Something must have happened, and I was determined to get to the bottom of it. The last time I went out to that cursed and isolated town, I packed enough for an extended stay and checked into the hotel. I only stayed there once due to the poor condition of the room. I thought I was going to have to stay in my car, and this was fine. I was willing to do it if that meant finding my sister. It was nearly 2 in the afternoon when I felt just how hungry I was and decided to go into the local diner. There, I overheard someone talking about a B&B that had just opened up, and even though it wasn't advertised online, it was ready to be rented out. Figuring I might as well check it out, I asked about it and set off to find the owner so I could rent a room for my stay. On the way out of the diner, I couldn't help but to notice that the flyer I had set up in the window on my last visit a few days before was taken down. The owners, a married couple in their early 60s, were happy to have someone stay at their beach house, and after everything was in order, they gave me the key code so I could get the key and enter the house. The house had to have been a 15-minute walk to the closest neighbor, but finding it wasn't hard. The building screamed old money and reminded me of a plantation. The surrounding yard was large, manicured to perfection and surrounded by a white fence. In the front yard, there was a large tree with a tire swing. Inside wasn't as nice as the outside. The light bulbs looked ancient and gave off a sickly yellow glow to everything the light touched. As far as the electronics in the rest of the house went, there was no television, or for that matter, an outlet to charge my phone. I called the Keels to ask them about this, and they told me that the house was considered an historical landmark, so no renovations could be done. After settling in, I figured to take some time exploring the place during the day since I wasn't planning on being there unless I was sleeping. There was a library, a dumbwaiter, and everything else one might expect in a place that grand. The view out the bedroom window revealed a lake and a dock through the branches of a bunch of weeping willows. There wasn't a ripple in sight. If I was there for any other reason than finding my sister, I would have taken that opportunity to swim. As I walked down the hallways, after unpacking my things, I thought I heard crying. I tried searching for the source of it, but whenever I was certain that it would be around the next corner, there was nothing. At the time, I just figured the noise was because the house was so old, or that the noise was all in my head because of the stress of my sister missing, or because I didn't sleep well the night before. Ignoring what I assumed I heard, I traveled back into town to ask people if they saw my sister or her friends, as well as to hang up flyers. I must have walked a few miles by nightfall and figured that I deserved a nightcap, so I went into the liquor store and bought myself a bottle of whiskey to drink when I reached the B&B. I am not much of a drinker and have a low tolerance, a fact that I am proud of, but I wasn't too drunk to have imagined the ursine howl I heard after brushing my teeth before bed. That howl, it stuck in my head for a while as I tried to figure out what could make a sound like that. Finally, with the whiskey's help, sleep overcame me. I woke up feeling refreshed, but that feeling did not last long. As I got out of bed, I froze. My suitcase had been moved. Right before I went to sleep, I put the case in front of the closet door. I always did this when I slept in an unfamiliar place. It was a force of habit. This morning, the case was next to the door, not in front of it. Someone had been in my room as I slept. I quickly threw the closet open, but there was nothing out of the ordinary that I could see. I did a cursory search of the room, and again, nothing seemed to be missing. I had almost convinced myself that I must have been mistaken, that I had drunkenly forgot to put the case in front of the door, even though I distinctly remembered doing it, when I saw the folded paper sticking out of the pile of missing person flyers I had on the dresser. My hand was shaking as I grabbed the note, unfolded it, and read the single word written on it. Lake. That's it. Just the word lake. I fell onto the bed. My mind was racing with possibilities here. Did my sister drown in the lake? Did people cover it up? If so, why? None of it made any sense. I grabbed a stack of flyers, snatched up the note, and headed to town. I needed answers. My first stop was the police. When they saw me come in, they all seemed to tense up. I explained about the break-in, and they did not believe me, until I handed them the note. The officer seemed shocked. He looked like someone just punched him in the gut. He waved the sergeant over and handed him the note. The sergeant also seemed stunned. They looked at each other in silence for a few seconds, then both turned and looked at me. "I am sure this was a prank," the sergeant said. "If I were you, I would leave town, head home, and I am sure your sister will turn up." Furious, I yelled, "Yeah? And what about the note?" Looking dead in my eyes, the sergeant crumpled the paper in his hand and said, "What note?" I was stunned. What the hell was going on here? I backed slowly away and left the police station. I glanced back and saw the officer and sergeant had followed me outside, where they were staring at me as I walked down the street. Right as I turned the corner, I saw the sergeant, while still staring at me, pull out his cell phone and make a call. His eyes never wavered from me, not even for a second. I was unnerved. I was starting to get a little scared. There was something going on here, and my sister seemed to have been caught up in it. As I thought about my sister, the feelings turned from fright to anger. She was still missing, and no podunk Barney Fife police force was going to stop me from finding out where she is. I headed for the diner, the last place my sister's credit card was used. Once again, I noticed the flyer I had taped up earlier was missing. I went right back to where I had put it the first time, and with the cook and waitress watching me, I taped 2 flyers up, right next to each other. The cook shot the waitress a nervous glance and went back to his griddle. I sat at an empty booth and waited. The waitress did everything she could to avoid coming over, but I just sat there smiling at her, watching everything she was doing. She kept darting glances at the cook, where he would shake his head almost imperceptibly. Finally, she had no other choice but to come and take my order. "What would you like?" she asked. She seemed so nervous she was almost shaking. "I would like 2 things," I replied, smiling. "A coffee, and—" She stood there, her pencil above the notepad waiting for the rest of my order. And information on why everyone in this town is pretending not to have seen my sister, you included. The waitress's eyes grew wide. She looked over at the cook who was shaking his head no, not even trying to be subtle about it anymore. "Please," she almost whimpered. "You need to just—" And right then, the officer from the police station walked in, pointed at me, and motioned for me to go outside. What a surprise. I mumbled to the waitress as I stood up. I was a little taken aback when I saw tears in her eyes. I was not sure if they were tears of fright, compassion, or relief, but she was obviously shaken to her core. I followed the officer outside, where he turned to me and said, "You need to leave. Now. Not tomorrow, not later. Now." "No," I snapped back. The officer got upset. "What do you mean, no? I will arrest you for hassling these good people. Then arrest me. Do it," I yelled back. It will be the first time I saw any cop in this town do anything he was supposed to do. The cop stared at me. He seemed to deflate a little bit. "Listen," he said quietly. "You need to go. That's all I am going to say. I ain't threatening you. I'm trying to protect you." And having said that, he turned on his heel and left. To say that I was confused is an understatement. I needed to regroup. I needed to try and get my head around this. I headed back to the B&B in my room, taking my food to go. And that was when I started to get some answers. I sat down to eat the food I had taken from the diner, when I noticed there was something written up in the napkin. "Look on the bottom," it said. I bumped the bottom of the bag as I did this, and felt the corner of a manila envelope sticking out from beneath. I surreptitiously pulled it out. "Don't open in public," was written on the top. The handwriting seemed to match that on the napkin. I opened the envelope on the bed, and inside were just 3 short articles from the local newspaper. Body found, dam to be drained, Wednesday, October 12th. The Keel Dam, named after its founder and local conservationist Jared Keel, will be drained to allow officials to search through the lake. On October 10th, Monday morning, a tourist was hiking when he came across the body of Deanna Smith, who had previously been declared dead last August after she had been missing for a decade. The body's identity was confirmed through forensic testing, and evidence of foul play was found during autopsy. Local authorities have reopened the case of Deanna Smith as a murder investigation. There are currently no leads. They intend to drain the lake starting at 12 p.m. on October 15th and ending at 7 p.m. on October 16th. Authorities urge you to go be seen by your doctor if you have drank directly from the lake or swam in it with open wounds. We were unable to reach Jared Keel for comment, but sources say that he is devastated with the news and hopes for a speedy investigation. Old Island to remain uncovered, new B&B to open. Wednesday, September 14th. While local officials drained the Keel Lake in search of bodies, an old nearly forgotten island was uncovered. An employee at our town library immediately started a petition to keep the island exposed for the pleasant view. During the hearing on September 8th, many locals were able to express their concerns. A volunteer group was then formed to clear off the island and maintain it in order to appease citizens that believed the island a source of danger. Son of the recently deceased Jared Keel spoke of how his father wanted the island to remain covered, but agreed with the petitioner that the island improves the view. He plans to turn his father's place into a bed and breakfast by the spring, and feels the two could attract tourists. His house had an excellent view of the lake, and now it will have an excellent view of the island, he was quoted as saying. Night lights on Keel Island, Wednesday, August 16th. On August 12th, there were multiple reports called into local authorities of suspicious flames moving about on the island at night. An officer was dispatched to the area and reported to have found no suspicious activity. After a brief investigation, it is believed to simply be one of those phenomenons that occur from time to time. Local businesses are excited to hear this, as the lights will help bring in tourists that enjoy viewing them. Mr. Keel has updated his listing on Airbnb to include a footnote about the phenomenon. I looked up from the last article. It felt as though my veins were full of ice as I stared through the window at the island. August 12th was the last I had heard from my sister. First the note, then the envelope of articles. The way the town has been acting. My answers laid on that island. I just knew it. Did these lights have something to do with her disappearance? I had one more night left. I would wait till after dark, then find a way to the island. I was a pretty decent swimmer, but the weather had turned a bit chilly recently. The article said something about a volunteer maintenance crew for the island. They must have a means of getting there. Perhaps a boat somewhere along the lake shore I could borrow for the night without anybody being the wiser. It was about this time that somebody began pounding on my door. I crept to the door and peeked out, but didn't recognize them. They weren't the owners, and since they didn't have on a police uniform, I could ignore them. You've overstayed your welcome. Get your ass out here, or we'll help you find a reason to leave. The larger of the two yelled. How about no? I thought as I crept around and left out the back door. I had grabbed my belongings on the way out in case the rednecks decided to bust in, and now I kept my eyes peeled for a good place to stash them. Unfortunately, there was no time. I heard the locals right behind me and dropped my stuff in some bushes to distract them as I ran toward the lakeshore. Luck didn't seem on my side at first as I scanned the sands amid twilight, but then I saw the faint silhouette of a canoe. I immediately jumped in and paddled as I heard my pursuers shouting from the tall grass. Before long, their cries were muffled out by my paddle strokes, and I was alone on the lake. The moon hung above like a glistening pearl, its gleam causing the tiny island to glow. Were these the lights I'd read about? As I got closer, I realized it was a variety of gemstones that poked out near the rocks. There were so many I was astounded that the townsfolk weren't using these to make the town rich. I knew as soon as I stepped foot on the island that something was off. The air felt cold and rigid, and no wind blew. There wasn't even green grass. It was just a dark void in the night, with rocks jutting aimlessly toward the center. Then I heard that howl, the same one that has plagued me since I arrived. It was right up ahead. It was loud and visceral. It made me think about leaving immediately, but I had to see if I could find my sister. I've made it this far. I moved toward the noise, the stones blocking my view and making me feel like I was in a maze. It seemed to be coming from all directions. This howl was both terrifying and disturbing because it sounded like a creature in pain, desperate for death to swallow it up. Finally, I reached a clearing and saw a large monolithic boulder with chains tied around it. The noises were coming from the other side. As I drew closer, I realized the stone was made of pure silver, the largest I'd ever seen. And on the other side, I found the source of the growl, a beast straight from my night terrors. It was large and covered in dark fur, with fangs and claws the size of my head. I thought at first it was a werewolf, but a closer look revealed gills and a fishhook tail. It was the strangest beastie I'd ever seen, and yet as I kept staring, I realized that it was in pain and not a threat at all. Someone had captured it and left it here to die, I realized. Then as the beast thrashed about, I saw something familiar dangle around its neck. My sister's locket. There was no mistaking it. My mouth felt dry as I looked at the monster. Was this thing what was left of my sister? I tried to reach for her, but the creature only reacted in violence. She was angry, frustrated, and confused by what was happening. Then behind me I heard voices, and immediately I hid. To my surprise, I saw the B&B owners walking along arm in arm, cheerfully conversing as if there wasn't a 9-foot monster chained in front of them. The husband was carrying a large wooden stake. Well, the offering is a good one this time. Our boy Jared done good, he mumbled as he used his weapon to poke at the monster playfully. Gonna eat good tonight, she agreed. That name they mentioned sounded familiar, but nothing was piecing together until I saw with my own eyes what they did. As the moon reached its apex in the sky, the husband staked the wolf creature straight in the heart, and I heard the mixture of my sister's screams with the howl of the monster. It took all my strength to not stop them. The wife took out 2 goblets from her purse, and they used them to pour blood from the wound into, and then both drank greedily. The older couple jerked and started to convulse, their bodies suddenly swollen and reverting to an earlier age. Before I knew what was happening, they looked even more youthful than I, and it was then I recognized their faces, the same ones I had seen in the article when referring to the Keels, but they were supposed to be long dead. This monster, this ritual, was keeping them alive. They laughed to themselves as they finished their bloody work and left my sister to bleed out. My own blood boiled as I heard them talking about their next victim near the shore. We need to find that boy who came to the cabin. You know these things run in packs. If we can turn him into his monster form and chain him up too, we will have another century to ourselves, the wife chuckled. Why should we do the work? The damn townsfolk have tried to betray us and send him away. I say we make those yokels do our dirty work, or it will be their skin we grind up. They sailed away as I shook away my desperation and frustration and turned toward my sister. They used you like cattle, and they'll do the same to me, I realized fearfully. I tried to recall the old legends of how someone could turn into a werewolf, a dream of revenge springing into my mind. Using my sister's large claws, I cut myself straight across the face, deep enough for the venom in her to deep into my blood. As soon as I felt it, my body convulsed and I shook in pain. Except I knew I wasn't going to be gaining any youth from this. My goal would be to find the Keels and destroy them, make them suffer for what they'd done. I took the canoe back to the B&B and locked myself in as the transformation begins. Unfortunately, I think this means I will lose all sense of my sanity, of my humanity. I am fearful of when this moment comes, but also I know I will have to embrace it. I must pray the locals can hunt me down and end this cruel life. With both me and the Keel family dead, maybe this lake could finally be a proper tourist trap. It's a hopeful thought to hold on to as I slip away from sanity and join the animal kingdom. I leave all this in the journals here, to be found by their next visitor, I suppose. If you're reading this, it likely means the Keels are still alive and I have failed. Beware the lake, beware the island, and most of all beware of the howls, for I cannot control what I shall do next. Third story, The Wolfman of Black Lake. Dylan lived a quiet life in Black Lake, Alaska. The town was named after a small lake there that had a high concentration of algae and was completely surrounded by trees that cast their shadows upon the lake unless the sun was at its zenith. These two factors caused the small lake to have a dark tint, which led to the choice of the name Black Lake. His closest neighbor was about 3 miles away, and that's how he liked it. Waking up in the morning to see the snow clinging to the thick forest of trees was his paradise. Sure, he encountered a bear here or there, or maybe the occasional wolf, But the truth was that if he left the wildlife alone, then they would do the same. Except for the deer. They'd come in like a swarm of bees and crap all over the place. He'd tried using repellent and would make loud ruckuses to scare them away, but nothing worked. That's why he got his two boys. They were two Canadian Eskimo dogs called Bruce and Port. He'd raised them from puppies, and they were loyal dogs and, honestly, Dylan's best friends. They were territorial and did a great job keeping those damn deer away. They even seemed to keep the bears and wolves away. They weren't scared easily and were as hard-headed as they were big, always ready to charge out into the trees. They were the first to clue Dylan into the fact that something was very wrong. One night, he heard a rustling coming from his trash cans outside. He whistled for Bruce and Port to chase off whatever critter was making the noise. But the dogs wouldn't listen. They both stood there at the open door, shifting anxiously and whining. For the first time in 5 years, something was scaring them. Dylan wasn't an idiot. If something was scaring Bruce and Port, he wasn't about to investigate what it could be. He shut and locked the door. He made sure he had his shotgun near him, and he didn't go to sleep. The sounds from the cans were becoming louder and louder. He only left the house when the sun was up in the sky, and the sounds had stopped hours prior. He couldn't believe what his eyes were seeing. His metal trash cans were crushed as if something strong had wrapped its arms around them and squeezed. Trash was everywhere, torn and ripped. At first Dylan assumed it must have been a massive bear searching for scraps. It wasn't till he saw the paw prints that his bear theory went out the window. He had seen paw prints from wolves many times. They were easy to recognize. These prints, though, they were huge, easily 3 times the size of any print he had seen. That wasn't what scared him the most. It was apparent that whatever animal had made these had been walking on their hind legs. Dylan didn't know what it was, but also didn't want to find out. Whatever it was, hopefully it had searched for scraps, hadn't found any, and went on its way. That next night, Dylan realized that his hopes were for naught. Around 1 a.m., a great howling startled Dylan awake. The dogs jumped off the edge of the bed, only to quickly hide underneath it. The sound was unlike any animal he had ever heard, hoarse and echoing. Even the crickets stopped chirping as if scared to disrupt the great noise. What was worse was that the sounds weren't far off. Suddenly his front door started to shake wildly. Dylan grabbed his gun, sure that something was about to burst through the door. Loud scratching sounds could be heard from the other side of the door. The creaking of the thick wood was loud, and it seemed that the door would give way at any second. And then, nothing. The shaking and creaking stopped just as suddenly as it had started. The howling could be heard coming from farther and farther away until it was gone. The crickets played their song again as if nothing had happened. Dylan didn't sleep that night either. He sat in his rocking chair with his shotgun in his lap. Bruce and Port slowly left their hiding spot and lied down at his feet. He didn't open that door until it was time to let them out for the day. Their fear had seemed to disappear, and they ran out into the snow. Dylan walked to the front of the door. Scratch marks. Giant, deep scratch marks. Whatever it was that had left them could have easily broken down the door. So why didn't it? Dylan walked back inside and slumped on his chair. The scary stories that his grandmother had told his brother Eddie and him as children had been racing back into his mind ever since he had seen the paw prints. He had tried being logical. After all, he was an adult. He shouldn't be scared of wives' tales made purposely to scare children into obeying. Still, logic was failing him, and his grandmother's stories were fitting too well into this equation. "Never leave into the woods after dark," she would say, "because the wolfman stalks through the trees looking for prey. He isn't a werewolf. There is no human in him, though some of his physical features are quite human-like. Maybe years and years ago he was a man, but no one knows for sure. What is known is that the Wolfman is over 10 feet tall with coarse fur covering his body. His face, feet, legs, and hands all resemble a wolf's, but he is not a wolf. Wolves are not evil. Wolves don't like to play with their food. Wolves are just animals trying to survive, but the Wolfman is different. He likes the fear of his prey. He likes the pain he can inflict. He leaves a mark when he's found someone he likes, and then he will return to claim his kill. The best way to stay safe is to stay around other people. He will stay away from those that walk together. Dylan was a grown man. How could he even think this could be an option? Still, what explanation was there for what had been happening the last few nights? He pondered for hours until the sun was setting. Weird. Bruce and Port never stayed out all day. They should have been home hours ago. Scratching at the door to be let in, he opened the front door and started calling out their names. It got dark quick out in the woods, and soon he could barely see a few feet ahead of himself. Dylan went to the back door to see if yelling out in the opposite direction would catch the dog's attention. He opened the back door and opened his mouth to holler when he let his mouth fall shut. There was a large figure laying still in the snow. Was the mystery creature crouched and ready to pounce? Dylan moved a shaking hand up and turned on the backlight. He screamed. Piled on the snow were the mangled and bloody bodies of Bruce and Port. He stood frozen in shock until movement farther out caught his eyes. There was a dark figure slowly walking closer to the light. He couldn't make out details, but he noticed a couple of things. 1. The figure was huge, easily 10 feet tall. 2. It had an odd gait that Dylan had never seen any creature have before. When he heard the loud, guttural growl, he quickly slammed the door shut. The figure barreled at the door, causing a crack in it immediately. A couple more pushes, and the door would give way. Dylan didn't even think. He grabbed his keys and ran through his house and through the front door. He made it into his truck when he heard the back door splinter open. He put the keys in the ignition and started the truck up, hitting the gas with all his might. The truck had moved about 10 feet when he heard the sound of claws scraping against the metal of the back of his truck, as if trying to grab it. He had just made it. Dylan looked in his rear-view mirror for only a second as he sped away. The sight of the creature would forever be in his nightmares. The creature was pitch black and seemed to be made of pure muscles. There was blood on his muzzle where long, sharp teeth were bared into a snarl. But it was the eyes, those red, unforgiving eyes, that truly shook Dylan to the bone. He looked forward and never looked back. 10 years later, and Dylan worked as a mechanic in a suburban town. His wife and 2 kids knew that he had once lived in Black Lake, but he refused to ever talk about his life there. His youngest son was going through a phase where he was scared of monsters. Silly Brandon. His oldest Todd said, "Monsters aren't real, right, Dad?" he said, looking up at his father. Dylan smiled and nodded. Neither noticed that the smile never reached his eyes. 4th story. Halloween with a werewolf. I live in a small village in rural England. It's a sleepy little place, but for all that it has quite a rich history. There's an old castle some ways away that was owned by a feudal lord in the Middle Ages, and legends about the castle and the surrounding countryside about. My favorite legend is the one about the Lord and his illicit lady lovers. It's a great story of guilt, revenge, and adventure, and I don't believe a word of it. My friend Sam, on the other hand, his favorite story is the one about the wolf. Legend has it that over 300 years ago, the Lord's eldest son was out hunting when he was set upon by a monstrous hound. It knocked the boy from his horse, crippling him on impact, and then fled into the woods. The Lord's men who had been accompanying the boy had chased after it, with just one man staying behind to guard the lad. When the Lord's men returned to the spot where the accident took place, having failed to locate the wolf, there was no one there. Neither lad nor soldier, just a trail of blood and signs of a struggle. The young man was never seen again after that point, but ever since, there have been rumors and whispers of a midnight black wolf that haunts the full moons of our quaint little countryside. It's just a story, but Sam, he believes it. He loves the story, and he loves the imagery of the wolf. One Halloween, Sam decided to dress up as the wolf from the legend. He was really excited because this Halloween was actually going to occur on a full moon as well. Now I know what you're thinking. Clearly this story will end up with me mistaking the real werewolf for Sam in his costume at some point. How cliché. Let me assure you that that did not happen. It couldn't have. Sam's costume was good, don't get me wrong, but it wasn't good enough to mistake for the werewolf from the story. It wasn't bulky enough, and the mask, which was really just a motorcycle helmet with lots of cardboard and fake fur all over it, wasn't expressive or lively enough for that. The rest of his costume was alright, I guess. He had gotten a lot of dark clothing and covered every part of it in fake fur. Honestly, he really had gone to a lot of effort with the whole thing. What really impressed me was the attention to detail he had used. The cardboard teeth had little droplets of blood painted onto them. He had a tail made from a wire brush that he'd made look pretty authentic, and he walked around in a hunched manner, like he was some bizarre Lupin homunculus, struggling with the beast that lay within him. It was obvious that it was a costume, but you had to hand it to him. The costume did look like a werewolf ought to look. It sort of put me off my lunch, to be honest. I mean, it really is quite weird when you eat someone who looks so much like yourself. Fifth story. I kidnapped a werewolf. It's simple. You get a phone call, the person on the other end of the line tells you what to do. You do it. No questions asked, and you're rewarded. With what? Money, women, gold. Whatever it is you want, so long as you do what you're told and when to do it. It's not rocket science. It's nothing the normal person couldn't do. Depending on the task you choose, your reward is even more intense than the last. What could be more wonderful? What's the catch, you ask? Some of the things you're asked to do isn't exactly legal. It was a normal day in my life, the day I found this magical hotbed of wealth, sex, and drugs. Like every other day, I settled myself into work, cooking for a bitch of a boss that didn't seem to give two licks for anyone but himself as he stalked about the kitchen as if he was a shark hunting for prey. His ragged breathing hot on my neck as my knife diced cleanly through a tomato. The rush of excitement I felt as the soft flesh peeled away to show the red, juicy insides kept the annoyance of the boss off my mind as his eyes popped out of his head. Slice up and down. He snapped at me as if I wasn't doing that anyways. I swallowed the sarcasm that burned into my throat, giving a curt nod to the angry giant who turned on his heels before bounding away in an almost ape-like fashion. I returned to my chopping as I prepped food for the dinner rush that was promised to fall upon the 5-star restaurant I currently worked in, heat sweltering in the depths of my outfit as I moved skillfully through the kitchen to grab more of the supplies I needed. Excitement dancing through my bloodstream as I spotted the meat I would soon butcher for the night. My skills consisted of cutting anything and everything with joy, passion, even courage as I took down live fish or chickens. The farm-to-plate restaurant was a perfect place for me, but something was missing in my life. Yeah, I got paid at least $500. I paused. What did you have to do? My eyes trailed from the meat in hand to the other preps only a few arms' lengths away from me. I could feel cold blood dripping down my gloves' fingers, dropping onto my boots as they spoke. I just had to drive these people to an old house and leave. They handed me an envelope of cash before I left. I watched as he pulled out a crumpled-up piece of snow-white paper from the pocket of his jacket, eyes darting to the other prep before falling back to the man with the envelope. The two were cleaning their station as it was almost time for dinner shift to arrive. "How'd you do it?" one asked. "Just went on this website." The man pulled out another slip of paper, placing it down gracefully to the cutting board below. It almost seemed to glow like a heavenly entity in the lights above, a shining beacon of hope and joy. The rest of their conversation was drowned out as I dissociated for a few rapid heartbeats. I sat in a trace, staring, for what felt like hour but could have only been a few minutes. "Charlie." The world started to turn again, as if everything was paused and someone suddenly hit the play button. "Charlie." The angry voice cut me from my thoughts as my head swiveled towards the angry man before me. My boss's body covered the door behind him, his head almost hitting the door frame. What?" I said. "Are you gonna cut that meat, or let it soak the floor?" Dark brown eyes staring darkly into my blue ones before I snapped my attention to the bloody pool that stained my once new boots. "Get it cut and get out of here," he shouted, turning towards one of the prep cooks who had just been chatting. "One of you's clean this shit up. I ain't paying you to slack off. You have 5 minutes till it's time to pack up and scram." Neither of the two men questioned him. I watched as they darted towards the supplies closet together. I waited till their shoes vanished from sight before scrambling to the table they'd been working at. Dropping my bloody meat in their cutting board with a sly grin, I chopped it up rapidly, waiting for my boss to leave. With a huff, I felt the man's presence diminish before my chopping slowed. I glanced at the envelope that was left on the table before me, nudging the envelope with a finger. No money. Frowning, I turned to the paper. It was crisp, a soft yellow color. It looked old but felt new. My fingers danced against the top of it to smooth out the crinkled lines. "Want cash? Cars? Boats or whores? Just follow the instructions and anything you desire can be yours." The shouting of my boss, followed by the noise of scrambling feet, caught my attention. Quickly I grabbed the paper, stuffing it into my pocket before pushing the bloody cuts of steak into its appropriate Tupperware. Moving quickly, I darted back to my station, brushed down my tabletop, dropping my dirty dishes in the sink, and whipping off the last bits of tomato from my cutting board. With that, I made my way to the clock-out table, grinning back at the two men who stared angrily at the blood mess I left on their tables and floor, before heading towards the parking lot. Upon returning to my apartment, I settled into the false light of my lamp, pushing the dirt, papers, and tissues from my desk. Everything collided to the floor with a sharp clatter, my hands sweating as I drove them into the depths of my jacket. The paper was a bit more crumpled than before as I attempted to flee my place of work before being forced to return my treasure to the hands of those who wouldn't use it in the correct manner. Anything I wanted? For doing something as stupid as being a bootleg taxi service? This would be a piece of cake, honestly. I sneezed a few times, glaring at the dog fur covering my stuff. I was allergic to fur, yet my roommate continued to allow her beast of a dog to trample into my room, chew my stuff, slobber on everything before I returned from work. The soft hiss of rain pounded lightly against the glass window of my room as I glanced over the front of the page yet again. The title image was enticing. I could almost feel myself salivating at the thought of all that could become true. Did I really believe that I could have anything? Of course not. Did I really believe that idiot at work got all that money? Of course not. But the idea he might have was too much for me to pass. I glanced around my crummy room, the paint peeling, the ceiling falling apart, a view of the parking lot where crack whores hung out. This place was a dumpster can in the middle of Garbage Island, and I needed out. I dreamed of owning my own restaurant, having a big home, a fancy car, a girlfriend, or boyfriend. Am not picky. To get started, please download one of the web browsers below. I blinked a few times. I remember these. I used to download these things to go on the deep web as a teenager. Of course, as a teenager, I got spooked by the smallest things and never dropped farther than a few feet of the murky waters in the shark-infested internet. Pulling my small laptop to a sitting position, I got started. My memory serves me well, as it only took me an hour to download and access exactly where I needed to go. Picking up the paper, it had a very specific set of click here to go here, type this here to do this, watch this to be added to this. It was a bit longer and confusing at times, but I pride myself on how smart I was, how skilled with the internet I was. Finally, I came to a page. It took a few heartbeats to load. The front looked almost like Craigslist, but instead of the usual buy, sell, trade mentality, it had different lists: money, women, specific expenses, special requests, a few more as well. Under these was prices, hours, names of top brands like Apple, Disney, Sony, whatever else you could possibly want. I went to click on the money slot only to have a chat box jump up. Hello. I hesitated. The name was just Admin1. Hello? Before we get started, I'm going to need some information. He sent me what looked like a job application. It asked for social, date of birth, what my current and old jobs were, skills, driver's license, as well as some other personal information. Was this a scam? I clicked out of the chat windows, clicking on the lower paying amount, which was 100. It took a few seconds to load, and what jumped up looked just like Craigslist yet again. Ads were covering the page. I need a ride to this location. I need someone to drink this. Who wants to suck a dick? And more followed. All these things were easy. ID drink someone's piss for 100, why not? Clicking out, I explored the other numbers up to 1,000. Some were a little sketchy, from doing nasty pranks, stealing, robbing, raping, and even kidnapping. Yet I found myself not caring in the slightest. None seemed that terrible to me at the time. I know, I'm awful, but I need money. I laughed at some of the stupid ones. Help me kill a vampire, Snapchat Mothman. I want to fuck a demon. Those would be easy money. I didn't believe in that nonsense anyways. I figured I'd take on a few easy ones and be set. I pulled the chat window back up. It took me another hour to fill out their forms. After I filled out one, I was sent another and another. After that, I made a nickname for the site before being informed I was going to be reviewed and would be contacted via my cell phone. He had me pick and choose some of the tasks I was interested in, and with that I logged off. Giddy like a child on Christmas, I could hardly sleep that night, devoting most of it to sneezing and laying in bed overjoyed at the idea of leaving this shithole soon. Sleep fell upon me late that night. I settled into an uncomfortable yet excitable snooze. A week passes. I was a little broken-hearted as I heard nothing. I decided to check the website again to see if an admin would be online, but when I tried to reach the site, it wouldn't allow me. Depression started to take over. Panic. I gave them all I had. My bank account information, my social ID. How would I explain this to the cops? Finally, on my day off, I was sent a text. I scrambled from the warmth of my covers, blood roaring in my ears, as I looked over the text from an unknown number. Hello, Charlie. You have been accepted by the admins. You will receive a phone call within the next hour. Good luck. Good luck? It was like clockwork as the phone rang only seconds later. My heart leapt as I put the phone to my ear. A ragged voice purred at the other end. Hello, Scrooge. I grinned at the nickname. I'd like to hire you. I was hired that day to follow someone. I met with a very average-looking man. He handed me a camera, tape recorder, and half of $500. With that, I was off. The man tipped his hat at me. He was older, wearing formal with a cane. He looked like someone's grandfather, but I didn't question this as I got to work. It was a long day. I was informed to spy on a male. He was short, maybe 5'3", long shaggy hair, shaggy beard, wearing lazy-looking pants and a t-shirt. He looked like any other normal guy, but I didn't question this. I followed him, took pictures, voice recordings, the works. He didn't seem to notice me. I felt a rush of adrenaline I'd never felt before, and as the time came to a close, I felt the desire for more. I got paid that night, returned home, and waited. I had 3 days off. I could do anything. I sat in my chair, logged on, was overjoyed to find the page was up yet again. I didn't think twice about it as I started to pick out jobs. The next 3 days went by in a blur. I did job after job after job. I'd pick a job. Either they'd approve me or reject me before giving me a different job to do. I stayed in the 500 and below range. I stole some stuff, broke into a few homes, made some rather unsavory phone calls. I had already made my paycheck 2 times over by the end of the 3 days. Upon returning to work, I felt like I was on top of the world. No man was like me. I had so many skills. I could do anything. I learned so much just by doing petty crime. It was such a thrill I almost couldn't hold back my frustration with work. As I started to clean up for the end of the day, my boss stormed up to me, his bulky frame looming over me, his eyes wide with anger. He opened his jaw to speak, but before his words could tumble out, I spoke out. "I'm putting in my 2 weeks," I sneered. The anger on his face melted, brows narrowed in confusion as I puffed out my chest to speak. "I found a better job that pays me what I deserve," I informed the male before me. "So/Ricky/ I continued. "I'm heading home. I'll see you tomorrow, maybe." I tossed down my dish towel, stuck my nose in the air before stomping out. What a rush. I hadn't felt that big since I punched Randy Gorman in high school. I entered my home as if I was the king of the world, my smile wide, my chin up. Maybe I wouldn't go into work tomorrow. What would they do? Fire me? I didn't need them anyways. With the way I was making money, I would be living the big time soon. I decided work was shit. I didn't need to work for those assholes anymore. Ricky would live without my help. He gave the chef promotion to someone else anyways. I went full-time doing my Craigslist jobs. I still stayed in the lighter range of things, but the more I did, the more I felt the tug to do more. Harder things, evil things. One night I decided to do it. I took on a $1,000 prize, something I'd been hesitant about. I had to kidnap a baby. What for, you ask? Who cares? They could have used this small child as a paperweight and I wouldn't care one way or another. I did what I always did. Met a lady in a coffee shop. She tried to tell me some stupid bullshit about it being her rightful baby or something. Who cares really? Boring details. She handed me half of what I was supposed to get. She got up and left. I sipped my coffee, glancing in the bag she handed me. A Walmart bag with a single envelope nestled in the bottom. My smile faded when a noise caught my attention. Someone grabbed the chair across from me, yanking it out, causing the metal frame to make a loud, angry scream. Slowly I raised my head. My heart stopped. Standing before me was a large, muscle-bound man with a wicked smile formed over his usually frowning face. Ricky. His hair had recently been cut down. His normally dark eyes seemed to have a new light to them as he took a seat. I swore I heard the chair heave in agony under the weight of his large, muscle-built frame. "So, Scrooge," my heart stopped. "You're the one who's been piling on the work loud recently, huh?" My mouth was dry. Nothing seemed to want to come out as I opened my jaw to speak, yet silence continued to fill the air. What was I supposed to say? How did he know? "Why, yes," I squeaked out. Did I really fuck myself over this bad? Was he sent to kill me? I shook silently as I took a quick swig of my warm drink. looking around to prevent myself from looking him in the eye. That's when my eyes fell upon a familiar face, the man I stalked. He was sitting in a chair not too far away, his eyes in a book, narrowed. "I have a personal job for you." My eyes snapped back to the man before me. His grin was thin, wide. He almost reminded me like a snake. I almost expected a thin tongue to come out and lick the air around me. "A job?" I replied dumbly. "Of course. I was the best after all." "What did that mean?" "Yes, a job. You'll be getting 20,000 big ones." The world stopped. Did I hear him right? My eyes grew to the size of moons. My jaw almost hit the floor. He looked around us as if making sure no one was within earshot. I glanced around as well, paranoid now, only to notice the man from before was gone. Blinking a few times where he sat, I returned my sharp gaze back to Ricky. What's the job?" I managed to spit out, taking another drink of my latte. "I see the way you use that knife of yours, Charlie," he whispered, getting close enough to my face that his lips nearly touched my nose. I felt shivers racing through my body as dread ran up and down my spine like someone ran ice claws across my back. Would I be key? I couldn't say it. Was someone's life worth all that money? "Yes and no. We just need you to make a very specific cut," he replied smoothly. Sitting back, the male pulled a folder from his bag, pushing the manila paper towards me. As if my hands were made of lead, I slowly reached for it. Ricky moved like lightning. He grabbed my hand, yanking me towards him so my face was only inches from his. "If you accept this offer and mess up in any way," he whispered, "your face is going to be in my next folder." I yanked my hand away in terror, glancing down at the yellow folder sitting in the table before me. Eyes wide with curiosity. I was the best, right? I could cut someone for that much money. Yet, the way Ricky was talking, I didn't hesitate anymore as I grabbed the folder quickly, opening it with excitement popping through my veins. The first thing I saw was a picture of the man I stalked. It was the same picture I took. His amber eyes narrowed, his long hair running down his back. Something about the way his eyes looked. It was almost as if he was looking at the cam. "Well, hang on. Who do you think I am? I went to cooking college, not Oxford. I need time to read." Skipping over the picture, I read what was written. For user, Scrooge name, Gunner. Gunner is to be kidnapped, taken to the location on the map. He is to have his tattoo on his calf cut off, not full leg, just tattoo, with knife provided as asked by the payer. You are then to leave, give the tattoo to the payer and go home. If this is accepted, you will be asked to take a week off. I glanced up at Ricky, who was sitting back in his chair, eyebrow raised. "Are you the payer?" "No, I'm an admin." I had a few questions, but before any of them left my mouth, he pulled the paper from my hands, holding it up as if to taunt me with it. "If you do this, you will be working with me and 2 others. You will be given all the money at the end. This is a big job. This man will not come out alive, but you will not be part of the main killing." He pulled a picture from his pocket, holding it up for me to see. I narrowed my eyes at the picture. The picture was of Gunner's tattoo. It was the skull of an animal with what seemed to be antlers. Probably a male deer. Judging from the name, I assumed him to be a type of hunter. So he was gonna die. But I wasn't the one who was doing it. I remembered the joy I felt for cutting open meat, the beautiful red. I glanced down at my shoes that still had red stained on them before looking back up at Ricky. "I'll do it." The man smiled, handed me the papers. "We're going to pick you up tomorrow at 5 a.m. With that, he turned and left. The night went as planned. I broke into the home, super easy, and took the small baby right from its bed. I took the screaming infant to its mother. Who cares? It wasn't as hard as I assumed it to bed as I drove home to get ready for tomorrow. As I got into my room, I noticed a package on the bed. I slowly lifted it up and noticed it had Scrooge the Duck doodled over the front, causing me to give a dry laugh. The inside of the box had a few more scraps of paper, giving the exact place I would go after the crime is done, what to do after, how to wash off blood, and how to take care of the skin. The box also held a piece of Tupperware from the very place I had just quit from not long ago, as well as a knife that was generally made for thin, perfect cuts. It was real. This was happening. I was going to help murder someone. I know I was excited before, but this was far greater than anything else I could possibly explain. It was as if my body was filled with lightning. Sleeping was impossible. I stayed up for hours looking over the picture of Gunner's tattoo, carving it out in whatever I could find to practice. My heart was beating so fast I swore the entire apartment complex could hear it as I continued with my work. The time ticked by slowly. I finally slept. Heavy, happy sleep. I dreamed of stabbing Gunner, his blood rushing out, covering the floor, lapping hungrily at the legs of my pants, spewing out, the room filling with crimson. I could almost taste the blood. It was so sweet. My alarm went off. It was 4 a.m. I got to my feet, got dressed in throwaway clothes, got a bag together and waited. A large car pulled up. An all-white van had its windows tinted as well as a license plate for out of state. I was growing more giddy with every second as I scrambled for the door, throwing open the passenger seat and settling it. This was it. I was about to help kill a man. I was going to help kill a man? For a heartbeat I froze. Was it worth it? Maybe this guy had kids or something. Wait, no, I hate kids. Who cares? I'll kill his kids too. Are you ready? Ricky asked, glancing down at me. The grunts of a few men behind me spooked me. I looked back to see 2 men almost the same size as Ricky. I felt no fear surrounded by these large men. After all, Gunner was small. How much damage could he possibly do? I nodded, sitting back in my seat as the car started forward. We drove for about 15 minutes before pulling up to a small park. It was well lit. The full moon glowed above, casting cold light against the grasses below. A small playground settled in the center of a sea of grass. Beside this was a path with lights hanging down around it to keep it bright. Every morning he comes running. Every night too, I chimed, reading the man's information on a slip of paper I found in my folder. I remember taking his night run pictures, more like dusk than night. I was excited. You could hear it in my voice, see it in my eyes. The men all got out of the car, leaving me to my studies. In a sick manner, I wanted to know everything about this guy I could. Sadly, much wasn't on here. Job, unknown. Family, unknown. Friends, none. So on and so forth. It was as if this guy wasn't even real. There were pictures I took of him chatting with a few people. He gave away soup at a kitchen, was seen paying for someone's groceries, talking to other people. Snorting at the good two shoes bullshit, I turned a page to see a small section, girlfriend. Sawyer, black dark hair, blue eyes. I just had a small picture of them together next to the writing. She was pretty. Maybe that's who won him killed. The bastard probably cheated. I scoffed. Time went by. The moon was slowly starting to die behind the trees. The stars danced. Where were they? It had been a good 20 minutes. The sun would be up soon, and so would other people. I glanced around looking for any homes, but the park was rather secluded. It was then that I felt something smack against the car. Scrambling to the window, I looked outside. Ricky was making his way to the door. I moved myself back into my seat as the driver's side swing opened. The large man settled back in his spot, tossing a gun into my lap. "Glove box," he snarled. Only seconds ticked by when the back door was opened. One man climbed in. The gunner was shoved next to him before the last man sat down. I sneezed a few times, causing Ricky to grunt in irritation. Saw the gun. Tail went right between his legs. Fucking coward. Ricky laughed. I glanced back at Gunner. His face was covered. Hands tied. Feet tied. He didn't move as we started the car. It jumped to life and stared to cruise forward. I raced my fingers through my shaggy blonde hair as we started our journey. The midnights ticked by. The sun cast dapple light against the clouds, but it was swallowed whole by the threat of a storm. Rain ticked against the window an hour and a half later till finally we pulled into a forest. The trees were dense, large, a 2-hour drive, and finally we were getting close. The entire drive I had completely forgotten my hate for Ricky, laughing, joking, and even smoking with the three. You can have whatever drugs you'd like after you make your cut, Ricky mused, my treat. Excitement was bubbling up in my chest as a small home showed before me. It seemed like something you'd see out of a horror movie. One should be worried a bad gust of wind might just knock it down. Holes littered the roof, and in the driveway was a small Chevy Cavalier. That's your getaway car. One of the men informed me from the back as they opened the doors, roughly tugging Gunner out of the car. He let out a grunt, falling to his knees before being hoisted up. I stepped out as well, sneezing a few times as I did so. I glanced at Gunner as they dragged him towards the front door of the house. I had almost forgot he was in the car. He had been completely silent, not a word, didn't try to move or escape. Something about the man made me shiver. He acted as if this was just something be expected. The house loomed over us, its old windows angry. It smelled of dust and mold, letting out a loud groan as the door was pushed open and Gunner pushed inside. The inside was covered in dust. The floors were carpet, covered in dust. The insides were empty, gutted out years ago by whomever owned this home. Now all that was left was an old couch dead in the middle of the place, as well as a small little table with a few knickknacks set on too. Gunner was pushed into the couch, and when his body hit the pillows of the cushions, dust exploded everywhere. I sneezed a few times as the dust covers the room. Allergies? One of the men laughed, opening the door to a basement. Only to fur. Not dust, I mused. Must be a cat around here. We need to set up and get ready. You stay here and watch him, Ricky stated as the three made their way down the set of stairs, each step screaming under the weight of the men. They're so big the wood's probably gonna break. Am I right? I nudged Gunner's arm with my fist. Don't look so glum. I sat across from him, sniffling as another sneeze took over. You get to go to heaven. I'm sure you're religious. I saw you giving stupid people money. Gunner's eyes glanced up at me. Anger was fuming in their depths as if they were made of fire. You mean the homeless people? He growled. Yeah, whatever. Those fuckers. You know they sit in front of my apartment and eat up all the space. He didn't reply to me. The anger in his eyes just seemed to grow. I felt awkward as I tried to think of something to say. What was I supposed to say to someone I was about to help kill? Nice weather recently, I fumbled. It'll be real nice tomorrow. Too bad you won't be seeing it. No answer. Soup, blue eyes. She your girlfriend? I opened my folder, pulling out a picture of the girl. She's hot. Maybe I'll make her mine after this. I heard the venom in my own voice. If not, I might not give her a chance. It felt wonderful to talk like this, to have so much power. He couldn't say a thing to stop me either, but his reaction wasn't what I expected. He laughed. His laugh seemed to echo against the broken walls of the home. She's scarier than me, he whispered. I bit my lip. What did that mean? I got up, deciding to explore to pass the time. I checked my phone, no signal. I checked around the empty room, but all I found were the car keys for my getaway vehicle. I pocketed them. Turning back to Gunnar, who was staring out the window, the rain lightly patting onto the ground below. A few drops of water fell from the broken ceiling. Before I could say anything, Ricky walked up the steps. "We are ready." With that, the men came back. They started to herd Gunnar down the steps, shoving him harshly with each step. He let out a small hiss of pain as I bound down after the group with a jump in my step. As my feet hit the floor, dust kicked up around us. I watched one of the men ruffle Gunnar's long hair as he was forced down into a chair in the dead center of the room. I sneezed a few times as my eyes adjusted to the darkness that collected around us. The only light was from a dim bulb on the ceiling. The sound of shuffling could be heard before a sharp, bright light flickered on. I glanced down to the floor as the brightness burned into the depths of my eyes. My boots were covered in dust. The blood still settled on the top of my boot from what felt like ages ago. That's when I froze. I could see shoe prints in the dust from all of us. I followed the prints from the stairs to Gunnar's chair. One of the prints wasn't human. It looked like the prints of an animal. I immediately noticed one of the male's shoes had fallen off in his scuffle a few hours back. But why would there be a "Hello, everyone"? Snapping my neck towards the voice, I looked on in shock. In front of Gunnar was a large spotlight that shone light directly on him. A few monitors and a video camera. Ricky was wearing a pig mask, laughing as he introduced himself to the world. This was it. It was one of those live stream murders. I heard of these things happening in the deep web, but I never thought I'd be a part of one. I forgot about the paw print as excitement rang through me like a bell. Ricky tugged a small table from the darkness. On the table were tools of all sort. I could see messages popping up on the screen. Put an ice pick in his knee. One typed, "Drill through his rib cage." Another wrote, "Scalp him." One roared, Now we will get to all that," Ricky laughed. "First we have a special guest." I felt a nudge. I turned towards one of the men who was holding a duck mask out to me. I felt my heart flutter. I gladly took the plastic mask. I placed it over my face before digging through my bag. I pulled out Gunnar's file and the knife, letting out a gasp of surprise as the file slipped. A few pictures fell out of the chocolate-haired male going about his life. My heart tugged. For a second I frozen, dissociating as I tried to figure out if I really wanted this. But the money. I looked to Ricky, whose hand was out to present me. I felt another nudge as I gripped the knife and made towards the camera. "Scrooge everyone." Ricky laughed. "He's going to be cutting off a very special tattoo before we get stared." Ricky made towards Gunnar, who was looking dead in the camera, the same fire in his eyes as before. The large man took a pair of scissors off the table, cutting open the other's jeans to show off the large tattoo on his calf. The world started to go quiet in my ear as I made towards the other's leg. Completely focused, I didn't even hear anything Ricky was saying or doing. It was as if the world was underwater. I slowly placed the tip of the knife against the skin. I shook, everything in slow motion. I looked up at Gunnar, who glanced down at me. His eyes flashed. Was it fear?
No.
It was something I could identify. "You'll regret this," he whispered. "I can smell you from miles away. Next time, don't spill any blood." I stared at him. What did that mean? What felt like hours was only a few heartbeats before I heard Ricky shout my username. I plunged the knife down. The sick noise that followed sent a shiver up my body. The groan of agony from the man in the chair caused me to break whatever spell was held on me. I slowly started to move the knife around the tattoo. The skin let out soft pops as the knife moved against its soft surface. Crimson dripped from the large cut in his leg to the ground below. splashing into my boots in the same manner as the meat from work. A giddy laugh broke from my lips, sharp metal gliding through the flesh like butter. The blood was covering his leg, my hands. I couldn't believe it as I closed the circle around his tattoo. He let out a few deep groans. As I started to cut the layer off, I froze. Under the bloody skin was something else. I pulled the knife back, running the tip over the dark hair. I sneezed. "Why'd you stop?" a voice asked. I looked back up at Ricky, dumbfounded, before starting my cutting again, but this time no noise came from Gunnar as the large flap of skin fell to the ground. I glanced at the opening in the skin only to scream. I jumped back in confusion and horror. Ricky scrambled back to prevent me from bowling into him. "I told you," Gunnar growled. He had been glancing down at me while I worked, and now he looked up slowly to me and the other men. His once amber eyes were now a bright yellow. His face was starting to twist. His teeth clattered to the floor as the skin on his body budged and moved as if they were a ripple in a calm lake. His long hair started to move, swaying, covering his back. The skin split open, blood racing down his body as the skin crackled to show off the fur under him. Panic exploded through my body, fear burning through my head, blood roaring in my ears as a small voice screamed at me to run. "What are you?" I hear someone yell. "He's still tied down." Ricky shouted, "Kill him." All three men rushed Gunnar, who let out an inhuman, earth-shattering howl. Everyone froze in fear. It took a few seconds for me to regain my control as I got to my feet. The men seemed to return to reality as they grabbed knives, scissors, anything to kill Gunnar. "Fuck this," I hissed, glancing at the screen of words. Everyone seemed to stop typing at once as the large men struggled to shove anything into the hard flesh of the wolf. "He's getting loose," Ricky shouted. "Charlie, help us." I looked from the mess of bodies cuffing Gunnar to the door before looking down at the large chunk of tattooed skin. My jaw fell. "Charlie," Ricky shouted again. With that, the cords holding the werewolf let out a sick snap. I raced forward and snagged up the skin, blood still dripping from it, but the tattoo was clean. A deer skull. In the middle was 3 large slashes. Just as I grabbed the large chunk of flesh, Gunnar sunk his teeth into one of the men's necks. I watched in horror as the thorn-sharp teeth broke through the skin so easily. It was as if the man's neck was made of nothing but jello. Gunnar tore a large chunk of flesh from its host. Blood exploded from the opened wound, splashing against the walls. I didn't waste any more time. I grabbed my backpack and started for the stairs. The sickening crunch of bones could be heard as my feet met the first step. "Charlie!" The anger in Ricky's voice was nothing compared to the fear that pumped through my veins like blood. I ran halfway to the top of the steps when a loud scream pierced my heart. My feet stumbled for a few steps, but I refused to look back until my hand collided with the cold metal of the doorknob. Sucking in air, I slowly turned to look at the mess below. Blood stained the floor, covered the walls. One of the men's heads had been crushed into the floor. His brain was smashed into the tarps that covered the area. The other's head was stuck in the wall as if Gunnar had tossed it into the now broken computer monitors. Finally, I glanced to the first step where Ricky was trying to pull himself towards me. "Charlie, please," he begged, holding out his hand. Gunnar, who had been breaking the rest of the computer equipment, slowly started to walk towards Ricky, whose legs were bent in odd ways, being dragged behind him. "Please," he begged. Gunnar dug his claws into the man's legs, yanking him down from the few steps he climbed. "Charlie," he shouted, tears racing down his cheeks. I shot him a smile, waved, and opened the door. Should have promoted me. The look on Ricky's face is forever burned in my skull. The look of betrayal. I slammed the door behind me. Now I had to run. No way that damn werewolf was going to catch me. I tucked the scrap of skin into my bag, ripped off the mask, and pelted through the house at top speed. Not only was my old boss dead, but I was about to make a lot of money. I couldn't believe my luck as I tore open the front door of the home, slamming it behind me with force. The car keys jingled in my pocket as I fished for them. It only took a few heartbeats for me to find them. A howl ripped the piece of the outside apart. Rain slowly started to fall again as I scrambled to shove the key into the car door, pulling it open with rapidly. Dumbass! I laughed. I was on top of the world again as the car roared to life, causing my body to slowly start to relax. It only took a few minutes for me to put the house miles behind me as I drove as fast as I physically could down the streets. No way that wolf was going to find me. I was safe. I just had to drop off the skin and I was safe. I glanced in the back mirror, and in the darkness of the dying day, I could just make out a large shape. It was charging towards my car at an alarming speed. Fear flickered back into my bloodstream. I cursed under my breath as the rain slowly fell. I knew the forest was thick, long, dense. Half of me wanted to pull over and start running, but I knew that he'd track me down easily. I felt hot tears burning into the sides of my eyes. I didn't want to die. I was just about to make the money for my own restaurant. Another howl. A deep, angry howl. I knew I was toast, done for, pushing daisies. I was dead. I'll never do this again. I just want my own restaurant. I was desperate. I shouted into the air, eyes wide, palms shaking, sweat racing down my brow. I didn't want to die. I promise I'll never hurt anyone again. That's when it stopped. Not the car, not my tears, but the feeling of dread. It was as if the weight was lifted from my body. I looked in the mirror. Nothing. The rain was the only sound I could hear, and soon I was out of the trees. I'm home free. I drove home. I changed, showered, put the skin in its proper place, and left. Now, here I am. I'm sitting in a coffee shop, waiting for the mystery person to give me my money. I have the skin in a bag. I don't know exactly what happened tonight, or even if he was a werewolf. I just know it happened. You don't have to believe me. I don't care either way, because I'm about to be the proud owner of a new restaurant. The only thing I'm a little worried about while I wait, I can't stop sneezing. It's giving me some bad anxiety, but I'm hoping it's just my clothes. They're covered in dog hair. I've been waiting an hour or so. Only people in here and a barista and a lady. It's not her. The lady who's picking up the skin is said to have blonde hair, blue eyes. This lady has black hair, blue eyes. I'm gonna go talk to her and see what she has to say. Maybe she just dyed her hair. She has a bag with her. She actually looks familiar. Oh well, wish me luck everyone. I'll keep you updated if anything else happens.